everybody. Welcome to the Energy News Beat podcast. My name's Stu Turley, President and CEO of the Sandstone Group. Today is a special day. I've got a fantastic friend of the show, and he is back. His name is Steve Gorham. He wrote the book, Green Energy Take Breakdown, The Coming of the Renewable Energy Failure. And I mean, it is a fantastic book that has aged well. Welcome, Steve, and we're so glad you're here today.
Hey, Stu, great to join you again. Thanks so much and Happy New Year.
Oh, Happy New Year. And I'll tell you, with the new administration coming in, Steve, can you give us some of your thoughts on, when we sit back and take a look, President Trump has said he's going to end the EV mandates. And then you sit back and take a look at, he's also committed to reducing our cost of energy to consumers by 50% in the first year. Holy smokes, Batman, that is a huge commitment.
Well, that would be special. He tends to exaggerate a little bit, the new president, but 2025 could be the year that dooms green energy, not only in the United States but around the world. We have
Wow.
four big things going on. One is the rise of electricity demand driven by artificial intelligence. The second is the electric vehicle slowdown around the world, everywhere but China. Wind, solar, and battery problems in many places on the grid and elsewhere. And then the new Trump administration policies. So it could be a big year of change.
I like the way you say big year of change. As we were recording this, Kamala Harris got to be the first woman to ever certify her own loss as a presidential candidate. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, that is a special one. And I like the way Mr. Trump has moved forward. You can see he's learned so much from the first administration. As I recall, in
Yeah.
2016, it took him about 6 months to even get his cabinet people nominated. Now he's got everybody all the way down 2 or 3 levels that have been proposed.
Yep.
So they're moving much faster than they did 2 terms ago.
And when you take a look at the trifecta, Doug Burgum for Interior, Lee Zeldin for EPA, and Chris Wright for Energy Secretary, that three musketeer group is phenomenal. And I think that get rid of the regulatory issues, and you got Chris Wright, who knows energy inside and out, everything from nuclear to oil and gas. And I mean, he is a top notch guy. I think you're going to have a heck of a team on the energy front.
Well, I think so. We'll have to see how much they can do. Lee Zeldin, for example, there are three big things that the EPA put forward this year.
Yeah.
Regulations on power plant emissions, and those are being challenged in court by about 20 states. Regulations on vehicle emissions, automobiles to
Yep.
get like 60% by year 2032. That's being challenged by a number of companies. And then the California waiver that's been granted on heavy trucks and on EVs and other things,
Right.
those are all things that I think could be reversed, or the Trump Justice Department may not choose to defend these court suits. I mean, they may just let them fall away. We'll just have to see. So there's some really big changes that could happen as far as the EPA.
Right.
And then, as you know, we have this Inflation Reduction Act passed in 2023 that is just shoveling vast amounts of money into renewables. It was the Cato Institute that's estimating. Well, during the Biden administration, it was about $15 billion a year in subsidies, tax credits, other things going to renewables. Went
Right.
down some under President Trump. It's come up again under Biden. But with the Inflation Reduction Act, the Cato Institute says it's going to be $80 billion in fiscal year 2025. Just huge amounts of taxpayer money going to all these crazy projects like carbon dioxide capture and storage, carbon pipelines,
Wow.
charging stations, offshore wind. And I think Mr. Trump has said he's going to reverse a lot of that. Now, since that's a congressional act, they'll have to pass some acts that limit it, I think.
Right.
And we'll see if they can get that through Congress.
That's going to be a tough one. And I love Dan Bongino when he calls it the porculus bill. I absolutely love that. Dan Bongino is just a cool cat. But when we sit back and take a look, like the today when we're recording this podcast, President Biden put the moratorium on oil and gas
Yeah,
drilling.
yeah.
And even though everybody's saying, oh, Trump can go ahead and turn it back around, no, it's going to take years to unwind the way that they have done this, from what I understand. And it is a absolute despicable act. It's not going to stop drilling for tomorrow. It's not going to stop drilling in the next month, but it is a slowdown of years. And quite honestly, natural gas, like Steve, let's take Germany for half of a sec. Germany, with their EV policies and their green energy policies, have failed. They got rid of their nukes. They tried to do wind and solar. They had to fire their coal plants back up, and they have gone into full deindustrialization mode. And they're a poster child for your book. They used to be the poster child for clean energy.
Yeah, they've really ruined their energy, and they've relied, as you said, on two things. One is wind and solar, and the other is imported natural gas, which they were getting for many years from Russia. But what
Oops.
happened was the wind and solar's been having problems blowing. In 2021, people don't realize before the Russians invaded Ukraine, there was a summer when wind output was down more than 20%. And so in 2021, they burned natural gas all year. And by the end of the year, the price of natural gas in Europe had gone up by a factor of
Yep.
5 times as expensive as it was. And then Russia invaded Ukraine and it just skyrocketed. And so if it wasn't for the US and Qatar shipping liquefied natural gas, people would have been without heat all during the winters.
Yep.
But yeah, as you say, right now natural gas is about 3 times the price in the US. Electricity in Denmark and Germany, where they have all those wind turbines, 3 times the US price, amongst the highest in the world. And their industries can't make it. Many of them are moving out, chemicals and
Yep.
fertilizer and a lot of other things.
They
It's
lost
just a,
the oldest steel mill,
yep.
and I mean that's how you make cars. The engineering, they've deindustrialized.
And their auto industry is in terrible shape as well.
Oh yeah.
They have a lot of problems with electric vehicles now. EVs are down in Europe. They lost share in this last year, and they have all these mandates, and the consumers just don't really want them, except for maybe the wealthy or somebody with a second car. And so they've created all sorts of problems, and they keep doubling down on all this stuff.
Do you in this past week it was pretty amazing. I would have never I did not have on my bingo card that I think Saturday when I saw that Germany has bought more uranium. They haven't even fired their nuclear plants back online or filed to turn them back on, but they're already buying the uranium because they know they're going to need it from
Well,
Russia.
that's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of talk about nuclear resurgence. We should talk a little bit about the demand in the United States because
Yes.
it's the demand is for electricity is something that's new, and it's really going to stop the green energy movement in its tracks. So over the last 2 decades, we've had basically flat electricity demand in the United States, about 4.2 million gigawatt hours, almost no change.
Right.
But all of a sudden, we have, well, there's a number of green things going on. They want to shift to electric vehicles. They want to shift to heat pumps and away from gas appliances. And
Yep.
the US government, in all its wisdom, wants to produce billions of kilograms of green hydrogen. And every kilogram of green hydrogen requires 50 to 55 kilowatt hours of electricity, about running a house on 2 days. But then biggest of all is this new drive for artificial intelligence. ChatGPT came out about 2 years ago, and all of the utilities in the United States were blindsided. Texas, for example, recorded record load in 2023 of 85 gigawatts. But because of AI, they're now projecting they're going to need 150 gigawatts. They're going to need to almost double it by 2030. And they don't know how to do this. Virginia
How do you
also.
double the Texas ERCOT grid in 5 years? Steve, I
Well,
don't know how we do that.
I know. I don't know how they're going to do it. So you've seen the headlines. So what's going on? There's a bunch of things happening. The first off is the nation's going to have to stop shutting down coal plants, and we're already seeing that.
Yep.
They're extending nuclear plants. Those are the ones getting all the headlines. There's a new nuclear plant or rather, a nuclear plant being restarted in Michigan, the
Yep.
Palisades plant.
Yep.
Microsoft is contracted for a restart of one of the 3 Mile Island generators with a
I
utility.
did not have that on my bingo card.
Yeah, they were extending the Diablo Canyon plant in California. So they're extending all these nuclear plants, and then we're seeing the same thing with coal plants. There have been two plants in Utah, 2 plants in Wyoming, 2 plants in West Virginia that have been extended, that were scheduled for shutdown, and now they're looking at Tennessee and Maryland and other places to extend these coal plants. and we're still not going to have enough. So the green movement already sees this coming, and they're they're starting to wail and gnash teeth. So the wind and solar just can't handle this.
No.
It takes 100 times the land to get the same output from wind and solar as a coal, a nuclear, and a natural gas plant. There's just no way you can do it. And so this is going to stop the green movement in its tracks. And when Mr. Trump comes in and pulls all the subsidies out too, it's going to further shift the dynamic.
You sent over a graphic and the massive amounts of land required by 2050, wind and solar is 220,000 square miles. You've got the whole, almost the states. We're going to have this brought in this podcast for our
Yeah.
podcast listeners. That's almost all the swing states.
Yeah, it's worth about 6 states. So this was from a study called Net Zero America by Princeton University in 2020. And Princeton is a renewables fan, but they said to go from 10% renewable electricity at that time to 50% renewable by 2050 would require 228,000 square miles of incremental land, and that's more than 6 states. I mean, this is something that is never going to happen.
Wow. No.
And we're seeing a lot of local opposition. I'm trying to think of the gentleman
And
who tracks this.
And Steve, I read something the other day that the solar panels you also sent over, storm damages to solar farms is incredible. I mean, a hail farm in Texas just wipes it out. Sorry, but it just hail farms find a way to do that. And I read somewhere that they were saying that the solar panel farms can absolutely be more devastating to the environment than nuclear waste, than our nuclear fleet.
Well, they do blanket the area. And I mentioned this 100 to 1 land difference. That comes from a scientist by the name of Vaclav Smil in Canada. He actually wrote a book that looked at the footprint of different electrical power sources, and he counted everything. He counted pipelines and waste pits and mines and everything. And he found that if you set a nuclear at about 1 unit of electricity for 1 unit of land, and natural gas and coal are about the same. But solar and wind require more than 100 times the land to produce that same 1 unit of electricity. So these are just huge costs in terms of land and build out. And then you can't use enough land. There's no way you're going to be able to serve the AI revolution on this. And you
No.
mentioned the weather fragility. One of the things about having, if you put coal or nuclear, you put it inside a building or gas.
Yeah.
And it's pretty well protected from something like hail, but we're now having more and more solar fields that are being destroyed by hail. We've had 3 major ones in the last year that have been completely trashed, and the insurance
Yep.
claims for hail damage for solar average about $58 million per claim, and they are going up and up. And the cost of insuring these solar facilities has gone up by as much as 400% in some cases. Or they put a limit on the policy coverage of like 10 or 15
Right.
million. So again, just another reason why wind and solar are having these problems.
Now, insurance also in the EV space has been a huge issue because those things weigh a bunch, their tires weigh more, and the everybody's complaining about the insurance on an EV quadrupling. I mean, it's been nuts.
Yeah, the number I had is that on average, the EVs are 70% more expensive in the US, and in the UK, I think they're much more expensive. And the other thing is, if you get into a minor accident and you damage the battery in any way, there's no way to fix the battery. You have to replace the whole thing. And that's like a $4,000 to $20,000 charge. And so you have people like Hertz Rental that is getting rid of all their EVs. And matter of fact, the CEO, I forget his name, but he was
Yeah.
forced to step down because he committed to buy all these electric vehicles from Tesla and others, and
Boy, the
then they
stock
had to,
market did not like him for that.
no, and they have to mark them down. Hertz is in the not only the rental business, but they're in the auto business as well. They buy cars and then they resell them,
Right.
and in 1 year, the price of their EV car stock went down 30%, and they had to write all that off. And so, yeah, they got rid of the CEO at Hertz, but there's just a bunch of issues with these things. But again, the problem is that we have many state governments and the Biden administration that wants to force everybody to get an electric vehicle,
Right.
thinking that they can stop the rise of the oceans if they do that, and that's modern superstition. And now it's all sort of caving in.
Isn't that wild? And you have Governor Newsom in I believe there's 17 states with Governor Newsom that have state laws that if California enacts an EPA of a something, they can follow along on theirs. So he has reach through the follow along state legislatures. It's just
Yeah.
amazing to me about that reach.
Well, that's a problem. The EPA has been granting waivers to California for many years on air pollution. It was set up in the 1970 Clean Air Act, I believe, because California already had some laws about air
Right.
pollution, which was fine, but it's become a situation where the EPA rubber stamps everything that California does. And then we have a bunch of other states that follow it as well. So we got all these crazy rules about things like heavy trucks, which are going to be impossible to electrify. But we'll
Right.
see what the Trump administration does. I think this may be some of these may be rolled back, or they may remove those waivers, and that's going to cause some big changes.
I'll tell you, I'm trying to get together some things for Doug Burgum for this interior, as well as Lee Zeldin and Chris Wright. Chris Wright has been on the podcast, and he is a cool cat.
Yeah.
Absolutely love Chris Wright. And if we can get a panel together and some things, I'd love to lean on you on some of these things and help see if we can't help tee it up for them, because I don't know that they're going to need every arrow in their quiver to help overcome the Biden administration landmines, if you would.
Yeah, it's going to be difficult. A bunch of those are guaranteed by acts, and in the case of the EPA, by the rulemaking, which takes a long time. But there's many things could be done. Chris Wright, first off, he needs to kind of purge all the Department of Energy websites that say, we've got all this global warming thing, and if we do all these things, we'll stop the oceans from rising,
He
and all
is
this.
not a global warming person at all.
I mean, that's one of the things that needs to be done. I mentioned three things about the EPA: the power plant emissions, car emissions, and then the waivers to California. Those need to be rolled back.
Yep.
The ban on export terminals that Mr. Trump put into place, natural gas export terminals. As we were talking earlier, I presented to the Pennsylvania Independent Oil and Gas Association this last year. The
Nice.
price of natural gas in Pennsylvania is so low that they can't make any money on it. They have so much gas and they can't get it to market. States like New York have blocked pipelines. They got to send it down to the Gulf. What we really need is a natural gas export terminal on the Delaware River, and we could ship a lot of gas all over the world. We could reduce pollution from things like burning wood and charcoal and things that are
Oh
causing indoor
yeah.
problems for people. So that would be a big thing that could be done.
What a great idea. And putting a floating station in could happen quick.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know the details on that, but possibly. They're doing some of that in Europe, I think, the floating stations for offloading.
Like Vietnam just put in a LNG import to direct to power. So that is a
Okay.
very smooth and fast way to a power station by bringing in a floating import facility. It's faster, and I love what President Trump has said. If anybody's going to be investing in the United States and you want to bring in, did you see when he was interviewing that or bringing forward that gentleman that was bringing in billions of dollars, 100 billion, and he stood there and he says, "Are you going to invest 100 billion? How about making it 2 million? Now
200.
make it 200 billion." I love President Trump for doing that. That was funny. But that's the kind of I thing your comment bringing in a gas facility for Pennsylvania to be able to get up to New York. But Governor Hochul just signed the bill that is climate reparations against the oil
Yeah,
companies.
yeah.
She is an absolute I gotta make sure I don't lose my podcast. A nut job, I think, is what I was gonna say.
Well, I think this is the second time a state has done it. I think Connecticut did it recently as well. But now we've had a lot of these suits in the past, but typically they've been cities or counties.
Right,
The city of New York, Chicago, San Francisco, Oakland, a lot of these different cities, I think Denver or Colorado or counties have sued the oil companies, claiming that they're getting rid of snow, they're doing all sorts of things, causing dangerous
right.
climate change, causing the oceans to rise. Those have all been defeated. I don't think there's a single case in the United States when monetary damages have been awarded to a group away from the oil companies. The only place where legal action has been successful, I think, is when groups sue the states. and forced the states to
Wow.
reconsider. The courts have said, well, state, you have to reconsider. But in the case of Connecticut and New York now, this is the first time that states have actually brought suits
And
against
and we don't
oil
know the
companies.
judges that may be either Obama or Biden appointee judges, so it may end up in lawfare.
Well, this is nutty, it's like this ocean rise thing. If you go to a site on NASA, NASA estimates that oceans have risen 120 meters since in the last 20,000 years, 390 feet. And we've only had human carbon dioxide emissions since about 1940, and the oceans have risen about, 4 inches since that time. So 4 inches out of 390 feet. Yet everybody's out there suing them for sea level rise. This is beyond
It-
anything sensible. This is modern superstition.
Have you ever seen I just saw this on TikTok over the weekend. A guy has got a glass of water. He puts a big ice chunk in it.
Yeah,
And he starts melting that big ice chunk and the water stays the same level.
doesn't change much. No, well, that's the case for the Arctic, which the ice is floating. What climate scientists will tell you, though, if the Greenland ice melts or the Antarctic ice, since those are on land masses, that would cause a big rise in ocean levels.
Right.
But again, there's really not any evidence. The only rational solution to ocean rise and even to climate change is adaptation. You do what Netherlands has done for centuries now. They built seawalls, they built islands,
Right.
thinking we're all going to drive an electric car and we're going to stop the oceans from rising. That's just foolish stuff.
And Spain has had horrific flooding right now, but now nobody is asking the question, Steve. The UN mandated Spain take 200 dams out to make it more natural, and that eliminated
Yeah,
their flood control. So it wasn't
yeah.
climate change, it was dam change.
Well, that's what California's in the process of doing and Washington's considering too. And they all say, well, this is, but they don't think about the flood control issue. I used to present what happened in 1861, the Great California Flood of 1861.
Yep.
They literally got a year's worth of rain over a few days in January. The Mojave Desert looked like an ocean. They
Wow.
got something well, I forget what the totals were, but there was a guy who toured oh, by the way, they had 10 foot of water in Sacramento, and the government was moved to San Francisco till the water went down. And then the Sacramento Valley, the water got up to the poles. These were telegraph poles at the time. It was 20 feet high from the western mountains to the eastern mountains. It flooded thousands of farms. A fifth of the cattle in California were killed from that one incident. And that's the power of what weather can do, what nature can do. And since then, they built a lot of dams,
Right.
and I think that makes a big difference. But if you start pulling those out, you may end up with problems again.
And it's why so many people died in Spain and everything else. And you just have to sit back and go, what happened to logic, Steve? I mean, when you and I grew up, things were a little bit more logical than they are now.
Yeah, well, the ideology of climatism is powerful, and the fear that people get of that comes from all the media and everything else, and education is powerful. But we're going to see this turn around in the next few decades. We could have a couple decades of cooling. You never know. It's very hard to predict future global temperatures, I think.
And one of the things that I found very disturbing is if we would get rid of geoengineering, and I know that everybody says, oh, chemtrails are that. There's too much evidence out there of all of them just absolutely. Let's not spend any money. Let's just cut all that money out if it isn't happening. It just seems nuts to me that they're spending all that money.
Well, we're going to get big changes here, and we'll just have to see what goes on with the new administration. These offshore wind turbines are another thing.
Oh, yeah.
We have Massachusetts and Rhode Island and Connecticut and New Jersey, and New York, and a bunch of states building these things offshore. But we had one wind turbine break up off the coast of Massachusetts. A single blade that was 300 feet long fell off a wind turbine, and it produced 5 truckloads of plastic debris on the beaches. That was a single blade. Wait till we get a hurricane that goes through some of these fields off Virginia Beach or or Long
Yeah,
Island or wherever, they're going to have just a massive mess. These things are not in Europe. They have a lot of these, but they don't get the storms that we get. So just
right.
another problem waiting to happen with this
And
green.
the microplastics that come off of those blades was horrific after talking to a marine biologist about this. The marine biology, the people that actually know science were just absolutely stunned by how dangerous the wind farms are.
Well, the again, we're not, and they do take measures, to protect these blades. They have the blades turn into the wind and be feathered. The problem is that near the eye of a tropical storm or a hurricane, the winds change instantaneously from one direction to another, and no, too fast for anything to react. So I shipped you a slide that shows all the from NOAA that shows all these storm tracks around New Jersey, and in 170 years there were 77 hurricanes or tropical storms. That's about one every 2.5 years. Boy, you have one of those come through a wind farm, and they're going to have a mess far beyond what they saw in Massachusetts this year.
Oh my goodness. Yes, we will definitely have this in the show notes and they'll be there. That is a heck of a storm pattern. 26 hurricanes, 51 top tropical storms in 170 years.
Well,
And you sit back and your map, your data and your research is amazing when you consider they are never a wind farm is never fiscally responsible from day one. The only reason it is able to be put up is because of subsidies and tax incentives. And then after 5 years, the maintenance numbers that I've been able to pull together, the average farm is applying for new money so they can upgrade the turbines and get more inflation reduction money. So instead of lasting 20 and 30 years, they have the best potential of 5 to 10. I
yeah,
mean,
I think the tax credit's going to run out in 10 years as well, so they need to renew to get those.
yep.
And then you've got,
It's just amazing.
what do you do with the blades when they run out too? Right now we have the blades that come from Iowa wind farms are being shipped to Nebraska because none of the landfills will take them in Iowa. They're too big.
Who
They
wants
burn
a
them in Europe right now, which, doesn't help with their emissions numbers.
Oh, I did not see that. Now, I saw that Scotland had taken out 14 million trees
Yeah.
in order to put their wind farms in. And then they got, because their wind turbines are turbines, they have to have diesel generators in their design in order to keep them turning enough to get to a certain speed. And when the speed gets up, then they can shut their diesel generators down. And so, here it is. They've ruined the wood. They've destroyed this, and then they're burning all this diesel to get the wind generation going.
Yeah, it's really
Unbelievable.
unfortunate, and again, it's the basis of all this is to try and reduce CO2 emissions, thinking that we can control the climate if we do that, but the climate is much more complex, and
It is. Well,
it's
Steve,
just a shame.
your forward was by Mark Mills, and I absolutely love Mark Mills. Mark Mills is a
Okay.
cool cat. I've had the pleasure of interviewing him twice. And again, I'm highly recommending everybody go out and buy this book now. Tell them Stu sent you. And then this is absolutely, and net zero is nothing more than a wealth transfer, in my opinion. I think net zero is absolutely a financial fiscal policy club that the administration has been using around the world. Did
Thanks,
I
Stu.
say
It is
that
a
right?
it is a fun paperback. It's got a whole bunch of color sidebars in it. Great stories about the one professor that says we should all eat human flesh to control global warming. There's another one about a Southern California cosmetic surgeon that was taking tissue from his patients and turning it into his vehicle fuel. He was actually prosecuted. That's not legal to do. But
No.
we're just filled with crazy energy and climate things in this world right now, and it makes it kind of fun.
Oh, it does. In fact, there's a picture of a boneyard, a wind turbine blade waste near New York. And in Texas, they got a boneyard out there in Texas. And these things are just absolutely horrifically bad for the environment. How do people get a hold of you, Steve?
They can go to my website,
SteveGorham.com?
Steve Gorham, GOREAM.com. I'll send them a signed copy of this book or any of my other three. There's one called The Mad, Mad, Mad World of Climatism. If you have kids in junior high or high school, they need this book to get a more balanced view.
and green outside the green box.
Yeah, that's about sustainable development, and it talks about how the four horsemen of the environmental apocalypse: overpopulation, resource depletion, climate destruction, and global pollution. If you look at all of those, the trends are really good on all of those, despite what you read in the press. So it talks about a little broader discussion of all those areas.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for stopping by the podcast. We're going to have the staff roll this out as soon as we possibly can. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Stu. Always at your service.
Hey, we'll
Best.
talk to you soon. Thanks.